This morning, we are, for our adult forum, we are blessed. We had, not to say he wasn't my first choice, but I did have another speaker lined up for today who unfortunately wasn't able to make it happen for us today. But because I am blessed by God by an abundance of wonderful people in my life, I reached out to my very good friend, Ethan Hume, who's the strange face on your screen that you probably don't recognize, and he's waving. And this is the Reverend Ethan Hume. Ethan and I go back to our seminary days, along with Pastor Betsy. Ethan was a classmate of ours at Luther Seminary. Before showing up there, he was a geologist. So what else do you do with a geology degree besides become a pastor? And so Ethan headed off to seminary, and the fortune for me is that we were at seminary at the same time and became good friends as a result. And then Ethan headed off to the West Coast and served congregation in I'm blanking on the name of the town, Ballard, Washington, just as part of Seattle, and did his internship and was ordained and called to serve at that congregation. But then his wife is a physician, and she is from Oklahoma, and somehow in the midst of that, they decided they were called to move back to Oklahoma. I don't know if you know about the Lutheran Church in Oklahoma, but there aren't very many of them. And so Ethan, God worked a little bit differently in Ethan's life and sent him on a new path. And I'll let him describe the work that he does now on behalf of the church and on behalf of faithful people everywhere, helping them with matters that concern us today. We're in the midst of our 3-week series for the fruit of all creation. And we're thinking about in terms of the way in which we support the church through our time, through our talents, through the energies that we have, and through the treasures that we have been blessed with. And so how do we share these treasures? How do we share this harvest that God has put before us and asked us to gather in? How do we share that back? And how do we do that wisely is the question we ask today. And how can our giving, the work that we do in our charitable support, not only with the church, but with all of God's creation, how can that be done in such a way that reflects God's vision for the world and reflects who we are as the people that God made us to be? And I've asked Ethan to help us try and dig into that question. Practically, what we want to hear are some best practices that help us shape the giving that we give. What are some best practices when it comes to estate planning or to just the ongoing charitable giving that we use to support not only the church, but all of God's creation and our neighbors who we've been called to share in love with. Now, with that, I'm going to stop talking. I will moderate a little bit, and if you have questions, I can help facilitate that, and you can use the chat to put your questions up, or wave your hand, or raise your hand is a very effective way for us to connect. But I want to turn the microphone over to Ethan.
Well, great. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so I think he summed it up well. We became very good friends in seminary, and then when we moved, one part that he left off was that I was torn between getting my master's in business administration and seminary when I was moving to Minnesota because my wife attended Mayo Clinic medical school, and at the last minute I was actually in the program for St. Thomas and told them, I just feel called to go to seminary. And so as we moved to Oklahoma, I didn't get my MBA. I ended up going to seminary. And here in Oklahoma, I'm a supply pastor for a lot of different Lutheran churches here. There's a lot of churches that are smaller and can't afford a full-time pastor. And so I preach at a lot of different rural churches Right now, our church is looking for a new pastor, so I'm filling in there. And so, but my main thing that I've been doing for the last 7 years is I work for Thrivent Financial, which a lot of you probably have heard of. When I say I work for Thrivent Financial in Oklahoma, it's a little different than when I say I work for Thrivent Financial and I'm in Minnesota. You know, it's a little better known where you are. So that's kind of who I am, and it's just been a great fit. I've always been really interested in the intersection between faith and finances, and even in my time in Seattle, did a lot of forums on what is the meaning of money in our lives, and how do we live lives of faith with our finances. You know, whether that is more than enough, or if we are struggling, or you know, what is our relationship with money, and how does Jesus talk to us about that? So today I am going to focus a little bit more on the, you know, definitely the charitable side. One thing, Peter, you were on the endowment lab too at seminary, weren't you? Yeah, so we had the chance to kind of learn a bit about, you know, the role of endowments in the church, and I know that's part of what you're discussing now, and creation. And there's they can be such a blessing to a church in what they can do for ministry above and beyond kind of what you would say is your ongoing ministry. And so I'll give you some ideas today. But before I begin, are there any pressing questions that people want to make sure I get to today at this point?
Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question about qualified charitable donations from an investment, 401ks, for example. And we've been doing that for a few years to Prince of Peace. But last year, with COVID going on, they said we didn't have to do a minimum distribution. You know what I mean by that?
Yep.
At a certain age, you have to take out some of your money every year. And I'm wondering if that holds true this year and how that might affect qualified charitable donations.
Yeah, I can answer that. So there was, you know, the Secure Act that was passed the beginning of this year, and I thought that was really going to shape what I was talking to people about this year. And then COVID hit, and that kind of changed everything. So with qualified charitable distributions and required minimum distributions, they are two different things. And so the required minimum distributions for, like you said, 401k or IRAs, that now it ends at 72. So if you're not already 72, you can wait until 72 to take them. For 2020, you are correct. You're not required, based on the CARES Act, you're not required to take your required minimum distribution. And that was because of COVID, and at the time the market was really down and they didn't want to make people take out if they didn't need that money. The good news is, so I think a lot of people put those two together, and for a long time they really were related, because it was 70 and a half when you took out your RMDs, and it was 70 and a half that you could do a qualified charitable distribution. So even though the RMD rule changed to 72, the qualified charitable distribution rule still is at 70 and a half. You do have to be 70 and a half. It can't be the year that you turn 70 and a half. And even if you don't have a required minimum distribution, you can do a qualified charitable distribution. So even though you're not required to take money out, you can make the same donation using the same mechanism that you were doing before. So that would be, yep, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if this will apply for 2021.
For the required minimum distribution. Yeah, for the CARES Act, not yet.
Okay.
It's just 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, but the qualified charitable distributions are a great thing for those of you who don't know. If you're 70 and a half or older, you can take distributions from your IRA. It does have to be an IRA, and you can send it directly to a charity or a church of your choice. And the great thing is you don't pay tax, and the beneficiary, or the church does not pay tax either as a nonprofit. So it's a win-win. And it isn't related to your required minimum distribution. You can do up to $100,000 per year. So not that, so I think everybody here should do that. No, I'm just kidding.
To be sent direct.
So there are some limits on how much you can give, but they're pretty high. And that's on an annual basis. So, and that's made a really big difference too, because the Tax Cuts and Job Act increased the standard deduction from up to $12,400 for singles, and then $24,800 for households. So for a lot of people, what they were doing, it still wasn't as good as doing the direct giving, but they would take money from their IRAs and then they would give them to the church, but they would write it off. So it wasn't as efficient, but it was a bit of a wash. I would say most people are not getting over that standard deduction anymore. And we can talk more about some giving strategies for that as well. Any other questions before? I've got a presentation, but I want to make sure I answer questions first.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lean in a little, Forrest.
Okay, taking the qualified out of an IRA, either type of IRA, a regular or a Roth, or just regular?
Just regular. I mean, you can take it. I take that back. You can take it out of a Roth IRA, but there's no tax advantage to you. So
Because it's already paid.
It's already paid. So that wouldn't be a place that I would recommend taking it from. It wouldn't benefit the person who owns the account any. So it would be a traditional, you would want to give out of a traditional IRA. And it does, another thing everybody needs to know is you can't take a distribution and then give it to the church and then write the IRS a letter saying, hey, this is what I did. It does have to go directly to the church or the charity. It can't come to your house. So that's a big one that you want to make sure you do. And that can typically be done with some type of paperwork at whatever company you use. I thought I saw somebody leaning in for a question.
Oh, Peter Haugen.
I was going to say it would be interesting to hear about your interest of the intersection of faith and finances, and kind of how you got going on that in the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. I think it was, when I was in seminary, one of the things that Thrivent actually did was they gave the seminary, I think it was $90,000 into an endowment, and the seminary had to match, I think, put in 10, so it was $100,000 endowment, and we were put, and it's a student run, I think it still exists, and it was really a neat thing for us to learn how that worked. So that was one thing that kind of got me going on that. The other was then when I went to Seattle and did some forums on just what does it mean to live as a Christian with a lot of different things. So we took a lot of different looks at not just in generosity, but what does it mean? How do we shape a world with our purchases? So what does it mean to use our money to create a world in which we believe people are being treated fairly. We're promoting things that are promoting other people and community. So that was one aspect. In Seattle, in particular, we had people who it's a very high cost of living there, and yet it's a high cost of living because there is also some very good jobs, and then there was several members who really benefited from the tech bubble. So a lot of what we would discuss was, what does it look like if you have more than you need? What are you called to do as a Christian? And if and how do we all live lives of contentment? So I think a lot of it was about what does it mean to be content in a world that always pushes us to want more, or in a culture which is always seeking more and more and more. And how much is enough? Really asking how much is enough? And so those were some of the, I think, the questions that we're called to ask ourselves as Christians. Is Jesus certainly gave an example of what enough was, which was, give us today our daily bread. And so anything pretty much above and beyond that is considered more than enough. Now we're all sitting indoors, which is great. So I don't think it was necessarily that we all need to take a vow of poverty by any means to be faithful Christians. But I think we are called to ask, how much is enough? Can I be content? And how can I live a life of gratitude? And I think gratitude is really the antidote to greed and to consumerism controlling our lives, or money controlling our lives. So I think those are some of the things that I think that as a faithful, the intersection of faith and finances is, how do we look at it as a gift, not something that is our own that we control, but as a gift from God, one. So that would be one. So that would be something, how do we live lives of contentment and gratitude? And then part of that is going to be generosity too. If we say we have enough, well, then whatever is more than that, we should hold loosely. So, and that's going to be different for everybody. So those are some of the things I think about, and those were some of the adult forms that we would talk about. And it was interesting, and I'm sure it's similar in all, it's similar in all churches. There's going to be those who have more and those who have less. And how do you live as a community together still in that? So does that answer your question? That was a bit of a, okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, everybody see that okay? So, talking about that intersection of faith and finances, we're going to talk about generosity today and why giving is important. It's personal. And what I would like to say is that it's possible for everybody to give. So for some, it is more time, talents, and treasures. I think we've all heard this before. For some, it's going to be more time and talents that they're giving. For others, it's going to be more on that financial side. And for everybody, it should be some portion of each. So giving is putting your faith into action, and it's also modeling for the next generation. And it's expressing your values. Again, if money is a tool, how do we express ourselves with money, with our values? And so, let's see. So there's different ways to express values. That would be, spontaneously, intentionally, or strategically planned. And we're going to mainly focus on that plan part, but it's kind of fun to think about what are the different ways that we do give. So what would be some examples of spontaneous giving? Anybody want to shout out?
Dropping money in the Salvation Army pot on the way into the store, right?
Yeah.
Rounding up at the checkout.
Rounding up at the checkout. Yeah. Yeah, those are ways that we see a need. They're typically, I would say, smaller gifts that are given spontaneously that way. Any others?
Responding to a ad or a mailing.
Yep. And watch out, if you respond to one, you're gonna get 20 back. But yep, that would be one way to do it.
Buying Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, buying Girl Scout cookies. Everybody's a winner on that one. What about intentionally? So, what would intentional giving look like?
Pledging to a congregation.
Yeah, pledging to a congregation. Maybe instead of responding to that mailer, maybe you have one organization that you make an annual gift to or a monthly gift to. That would be intentional. And then what do you think of when you hear strategically or planned giving?
Well, that would be a state or through your will or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we already spoke a little bit about it too. I mean, I think if you're planning to give to the church, but you're strategic about where that money comes from, like a qualified charitable distribution, I would say that's strategic. Planned would be your estate, and then even in joining others, like in an endowment, where you're saying, I would like my intentional giving to continue. Well, how do I do that? How can I do some strategic planning now so that my giving can outlive me? So that would be, definitely ways that you could do that. And planned giving can be for families and beneficiaries, churches, charities, and causes. I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this. Part of this is in conjunction with In Faith Community Foundation. So I'll discuss a few of those options. But it can be, it can be pretty simple. So I would say in the simplest level, something that everybody could do today is if something has a beneficiary on it, like if you have an IRA, if everybody put 10% to the church or 10% to a charity of your choice, that immediately, you've done some strategic planning. It doesn't have to be that complex. It can be pretty simple. So that would be a really simple way to do some planning and just say, what are some causes that we care about? And if our intention is to leave some to our family, but we also want to leave a legacy, that's a really simple way to just think of a percentage and change your beneficiaries. A more complex way would be to set up a trust, and it goes through that. And we'll get into some of the others, but that is one of the simplest ways that I think people just don't think about, that they set their beneficiaries. You wouldn't believe how many times I meet with people and they set their beneficiaries 30 years ago. And I had, this was last week. I had somebody, I said, oh, it looks like your wife is the beneficiary. And he said, oh, okay. And I said the name. And he said, oh, actually, I've been remarried for 28 years now. I need to update it to my current wife. So that is not uncommon, that we often set things and we just don't look at them, and it has some pretty big ramifications if beneficiaries aren't done correctly. So I would encourage everybody to check your beneficiaries and then just see if maybe you can put a percentage towards a charity or the church, because typically if you're leaving something, a percentage, 100% to family isn't going to make that big of a difference between 90%. So I think some of the common misconceptions, and that's why I mentioned just that really simple strategy of just changing beneficiaries. When you think of planned giving, people think they need to be rich, old, or both. And you might say, well, I'm all three of those, or all two of those, or maybe I'm none of those. But that's not true. I think another misconception is that it will reduce what I leave to my heirs. I think that's another misconception, is that if something is left for a charity, that's money out of my kids' pockets. Well, that may be somewhat true, but it doesn't have to be 100% true. And then I can't change it once plans are made. That's also typically not true. There's very few things that if you set up, you can't make any changes to. And then it's what happens when I die. That also is not true. There's lots of things that you can do now that you might have available to you that are just better ways to give. So by planning, you might be able to give more. You might be able to give assets other than cash. So when I say assets other than cash, sometimes people have appreciated stock. And so this is going to, if you have appreciated stock, outside of an IRA, that is something that you can give either to a donor advised fund, or I don't know if the church is set up for it, but you can give it directly. Oh, it is? Okay. You can give it directly to the church. You don't pay the, you get the benefit of the full value as a write-off to the church. And then the capital gains, the church, you don't pay because you gave it to the church, and the church gets 100% of it. And so that is something that I've done with some clients, especially if they've worked for a company a long time, they've gotten a lot of company stock. They'll use that company stock as their giving strategy because they don't want to pay the gains in the stock. And it's the same money to the church if it's given to the church. So that would be another asset. It's also an opportunity to include family and future generations. One thing you can do is if you set up like a charitable estate through like a community foundation, you can have it where future generations get to decide where some of those donations go, which is pretty neat. And so you can involve future generations. And it also, again, it's not just about the money. It's about creating a spirit of generosity for the next generation. And so that impact can often have a bigger impact in teaching the next generation about what does it mean to be content and be a generous person. So you can also ensure your kids or grandkids benefits. So that's something that, instead of looking at it from percentage wise, you might say, well, how much do I want to leave for my kids or grandkids? And maybe some of that is in the form of they get to decide where some of this money is to be given away. And then tax benefits, of course, and you also have the option to receive ongoing income payments. So, yeah, planned giving, we talked about some of this. These are some of the things that we can discuss. I'll just give an example. So here's Jean, she's in her 80s, widow of a pastor, active in her church. A solution for her might be a charitable gift annuity. So it's going to provide income while she's living that she can't outlive. And then whatever is remaining will pass to the church foundation after her passing. So that's, that's not going to be the right solution for everybody, but that is something that's out there that might make sense for somebody who's a widow, whose children don't necessarily need the assets once they're gone, and it provides lifetime income. So here's Athena and Henry, a couple in their 60s with grown children and farmland. They want to secure retirement, provide for their kids, and give to their favorite charities. So a solution for them might be a charitable trust and a donor advised fund. So they receive quarterly trust payments, so they still get to receive money from the trust. They will set up life insurance. They're both insurable, and so the kids are going to get the life insurance, and then the charities are going to give ongoing support from the remainder of what's in the trust. So, and I don't know if it's in here, but what can be done sometimes too is people may have accumulated a lot of land. And so that's another charitable option, is if there's a generation it may be a farm or some land that maybe the next generation you don't see really wanting to use or deal with. You can sell that land, put it into a charitable trust, receive income from it, and then it goes to the charity, and you get the tax benefit of, you don't have to pay the capital gain. So those are some of the things that can work well. It's not gonna, that's pretty specific. But that happens a lot, that transferring land is a real pain. So if you can do it now instead, and have charities benefit, that's often a really good way to take income from that. And then assets that are easier to pass to children, such as tax-free life insurance or Roth IRAs, things like that children will receive tax-free. So one of the things I want to, all right, Secure Act. So we discussed I'm going to reiterate again, the qualified charitable distribution. If you're over 70 and a half and you have qualified funds in an IRA, a traditional IRA, you can't beat the tax benefit. The church doesn't pay tax on receiving those funds. You don't pay tax because it never comes to you. It's a win-win for everybody. So if you are 70 and a half and you have an IRA, I would really recommend doing qualified charitable distributions for your giving. Let's see. This is part of the Secure Act, not really changes to qualified charitable distributions. There really weren't any, except that it wasn't tied to the RMDs anymore. I do get asked if you can put qualified charitable distributions into something like a donor advised fund, and that is something that you cannot do unless it is a donor non-advised fund. Which again, if any of that is something that you're saying, I want to know more about that. That's again pretty specific, but typically you're going to want those qualified charitable distributions going directly to the church or charity of your choice. Something for people to know this year is the elimination of the Stretch IRA. So in the past, if you had, let's say, $100,000 IRA and it passed to your children, they could take the required minimum distributions over their lifetime. Well, that has changed. It is typically now going to be 10 years. So it's going to be compressed to 10 years. So if your children or grandchildren or whoever the heirs are of that IRA receive the IRA, they do have to take the proceeds out within 10 years. And so that compresses the time frame in which that is taxable. What I see is typically when children inherit those IRAs, they're typically at the peak of their earning years. And so it just doesn't work out well tax-wise for them to be inheriting that money. So something to think about doing is if it's money that can be given to a charity, they're going to receive it tax-free, or utilize your own tax bracket now to maybe take out more than you need if your intention is to leave it to family and not charity. So I'm going to X out of this. Peter, how are we doing on time?
We have, let's see, we're about at 10:40.
Okay.
We definitely want to move into any additional Q&A here pretty soon, I would say. Okay,
perfect. One thing I'd like people to know about too is, with the standard deduction going up so much, again, up to $24,800 and $12,400 for singles. Something that some people are doing is doubling up on their donations or tripling up on their donations in 1 year and putting that into a donor advised fund. So a donor advised fund is held at a community foundation, basically. And what it does is you get the tax break in that 1 year, and then you can take distributions for the next 2, 3, 4 years to a charity that you care about. So it's a way that you might be able to get over that standard deduction in 1 year, and then the rest of the years you would just take the standard deduction. But that is a way to do some plan giving too, if you're looking for some tax breaks on the giving side, if you're not, taking it out of a qualified fund. Even if you're over 59 and a half, but you're not quite 70 and a half, and you like that idea of taking some of that money, that tax deferred money that you've never paid tax on, that's something you could do as well. And again, consult your accountant and your advisor. But you can take money out, put it into a donor advised fund. It's going to show as taxable income to you, but if you can get over that standard deduction with the donation to a donor advised fund, it's kind of the only way to itemize itemize for a lot of people. So you can put in that donor advised fund, you get an immediate deduction, and then whenever you would leave beneficiaries as well. So if for some reason there was money in there and something happened to you, you want to make sure that you have charities or churches that you care about that it would go to. But then you can take those distributions out. So again, that is a strategy. If you had appreciated stock, you can also do that. You can put that appreciated stock into a donor advised fund, especially if that stock is up and you want to sell, but you don't want to take the capital gains. You can put that into a donor advised fund, and then that can go to charity. So,
Ethan, how do people get connected with those donor advised fund managing organizations?
Yeah, so you happen to have one right down the street. It's In Faith Community Foundation, and I can connect people with the people there if you'd like. I can send out my contact information. But yeah, In Faith Community Foundation is who I work with. Thrivent is technically the owner or partner. I don't exactly know what the relationship is, but it is related to Thrivent. But when you do that donor advised fund, you're technically giving that money to that foundation, basically. And then from that, you get to control where that money then goes. So there are some other donor advised funds with different companies, but I'm not familiar with how they work.
And we do have a couple of members, a few members at Prince of Peace that have recently made the change to this sort of way to give us regular support, to send their regular support through a donor advised fund to the church.
Right.
I'm curious. That organization receives, a big bunch of money. And so they have control of those assets. Presumably those assets are being then reinvested.
Yes.
And what becomes of the growth of the original of the assets? Who controls that? Is that credited back to the individual donor, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, good. No, it stays in the fund. So if you set up a donor advised fund, you get that immediate, tax benefit. Let's say you put in 10,000.
Sure.
And then it grows to 12, 13, 14. That's just more money that you get to give away. So it can be used in a few different ways.
Probably less some fees, I'm guessing.
There are some fees, yeah. And
Okay.
I think it's different. It's going to be different for everyone. I think it's, typical donor advised fund is going to be around 1%.
Okay.
Oh. And the nice thing I know with In Faith Community Foundation is that they have very low minimums. They really want to encourage kind of this to be something for everybody to use. And that's really what they're set up for. Instead of having to set up like a family trust, where you have to pay an attorney to, and typically you would want to have a very sizable estate. Great thing about, donor advised funds or charitable remainder trust through a community foundation is it's turnkey. It's meant for everybody who has, like, I'm assuming that people have I guess a little bit more than enough to live off of, right? So that would be, that's kind of the way that those work. So
Yeah.
And Peter, sometimes some of the charities that you give to, especially if you give large amounts, have they run donor advised funds.
yeah.
And I know at least one of mine, I've been thinking about doing it that way rather than dealing with all of this complication myself with a good tax man, is that I've been thinking of actually going to them with and having them do a donor advised fund for me.
Yeah.
Especially as I get older and harder, and keeping track of all of the rule changes and whatnot is getting more complex. So
Yeah. The only downside to going to a specific organization to do a donor advised fund is that then if you change your mind, it's already been given to that organization. If it's something like a community foundation that is a donor advised fund for you, then it can be, you can change who you want to give it to. You can change the beneficiaries. Looks like you've got it. Okay.
that's interesting, because this one sounded like you had still the ability to make choices. It didn't all have to go to them, but
Okay.
I haven't done it. So maybe I'd find out that I'm wrong in thinking that.
Well, just they're all going to be different. Just look into that though.
Yes. Mhm.
Because if you and it's not a bad thing. It's just people change their mind sometimes. It might be that you care about the heart hospital right now, but maybe you don't in 20 years.
Yes.
Because they've changed how they do things, and but you've already done it. So yeah, that would be some advice I would give to people. If you don't go with a community foundation that's kind of like in faith, that's independent. I mean, there might be others in Minnesota. I don't know. Like here in Oklahoma, we have the Oklahoma Community Foundation. So
We have a member that uses the St. Paul Community Foundation.
okay.
Too. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So there's others out there, and then those really are geared more towards, they survive by, they do charge a fee for it, but the benefits outweigh the cons in my mind. So one thing I was, just as an example, so this is me. I'm not 65 yet, but I gave an example of
Next year.
If you had a qualified fund, so like an IRA worth about let's say or you take 100,000 out of that, and you're assuming you're getting a 6% return, so a moderate rate, and you're going to take out 5%, and you're in a 25% tax bracket, and your heir is 25%. There's just some strategies, with a little bit of planning, if you are insurable. If you do nothing, let's say, my wife and I at age 86, that's the end of our ride here on earth. And our favorite daughter and our favorite daughter too, they would each get around 60,000, because it would have increased somewhat, minus the distributions that we're spending. And then we would have paid 39, almost 40,000 in taxes, or they would pay 40,000 in taxes. So another plan would be to take that distribution minus the taxes, and that would buy a life insurance policy for 165,000, assuming an annual premium of, I can't see it because Zoom's in the way, but 3,000 something.
750.
Okay. And that buys a policy for 165,000. So that would increase the estate, assuming we die at age 86, to 248,000, leaving roughly double, a little over double to our favorite daughters. And then the taxes would be reduced because we're taking out a little bit more money from the IRA on our end. The other, which, just something to think about, is you say, okay, well, the girls, they're going to get the life insurance. They're going to get 82,000, which is more than what they would have gotten taxable, or post-tax to them. And then we're going to leave the charity that 110,000 that would otherwise go to the girl. And then that leaves out, nobody pays tax. So, when we all die, our money is going to go to three places. It's going to go to family, charity, or the IRS. And so that is a strand. If you are interested in leaving a legacy in a tax efficient manner, that is something that a lot of people do once, especially if they realize that they are in a place of surplus and that they have enough, and then they're not going to outlive their assets. You can look at doing some things like this. I mean, it's assuming you're insurable, but that's just an idea for planning as well. I'm going to stop sharing, or unless you want to see it.
Yeah, we've got just a few minutes left. If anybody has any more questions or curiosities, or I would like to lift up just a quick reminder of the story around Rose Diesler for us all, because this relates deeply to an ongoing activity for the church right now, which is, Rose passed away and did not have much of her planning established as she was getting sicker near the end of her life, and that without a doubt added a weight to her shoulders that I don't think was necessary for her to carry. And the reason I say that is because once things were settled and that planning was done, you could tell the weight had been lifted. And so I feel, there is something really powerful in good estate planning that enables people to continue to thrive and experience life, even in the face of death. That work, those decisions can be made in such a way as to really keep a burden off one's shoulders. Ultimately, Rose left a significant portion of her estate to her church, which mattered deeply, as many of you who knew her know that the church mattered to her. And the work that we did together as a community of faith mattered to her. And so what a tremendous testament and witness that to us that she entrusted us with her assets. And we've been working to put those to the work for the sake of God's church and for the sake of God's world. One of those opportunities, the congregation voted last summer, in the summer of 2019, to dedicate a portion of of her estate gift to our Enduring Legacy Fund, our Enduring Gifts Fund, which is a legacy fund, an endowment fund that was established a little over 10 years ago, but never really was funded. And so the congregation elected to set aside $200,000 of Rose's estate to help encourage others to participate in making contributions to support this fund in form of a match. So every additional dollar that was raised would be matched 4 times by Rose's dollars. So every $100 gift to the fund would actually contribute $500 to the fund. The goal is, in the founding documents of the fund, requires us to have at least $250,000 in the fund before the fund begins throwing off annual contributions to the ministry of the church. So we need to get it to $250,000 before we can start reaping some of that harvest. And so Rose's estate has given us $200,000. The congregation voted for this. This was the decision of the congregation. And now we need that other $50,000. Now we've raised not quite $10,000 so far. People have contributed. So we're 20% of the way there with that extra. In your annual giving campaign materials that some of you hopefully have received in the mail, and if you haven't, you'll be getting them shortly. There is an opportunity to include the Enduring Gifts Fund in your and to make a gift this year to help us get over that threshold, so that we can now presumably even in 2021, after the year, we have a committee that will get formed that every year then will decide how the funds that get dispersed each year will be spent. There are no restrictions on how those funds can be spent. They could be contributed to the ongoing ministry of the church to help support the general fund, or they could be special initiatives going forward. Now, Rose's particular gift of $200,000, that's a significant amount. Without a doubt, it's a significant amount, but it also tells another story. It is hoped that a fund like this would annually throw off about 5%, okay, through the growth of the fund, through its investment growth, but also through new contributions. And, you know, gradually the point of the endowment is to keep it growing. If we were to pull 5% of the fund value every year to support the ministry of the church, 5% of Rose's gift of $200,000 is $10,000. That is essentially equal to the amount of money that Rose was giving to the church on an annual basis. Here's where Rose's generosity becomes enduring. Her gift to the church goes on in perpetuity. As long as that fund remains intact and continues to grow and thrive, her gift to the church will continue to come to the church year in and year out. And so this is what makes her witness enduring for the life of the church. And we will continue to remember her as a result, and remember her through the good that those funds will be able to do, supporting the work of God's mission in the world, and helping us love our neighbors each and every day as a result. So that's Rose's story, and I think it's an important one because it's an initiative that we're undergoing right now. So if any of you have some IRA required minimum distributions maybe that you'd like to share this year, you could dedicate those to the Enduring Gifts Fund and then have them matched 4 times by Rose Diesler's money, so that we can get to our stated goal. So are there any other questions for us today before we let Ethan escape from our clutches of the northern Minnesotan? He can go back to enjoying life in Oklahoma.
Gonna go suntan by the pool.
Right.
Oh.
Kurt has a question.
Yeah.
Just a comment that Ethan made, that the planning is important and time goes by very quickly.
Mhm.
I always equate it to the Constitution of the church. Every 5 years, you better revise it because a lot of things changed, including the pastors.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, but
I hope that wasn't a threat, Kurt.
no. But the same way with you talk about the IRA, and I look at Kent as a farm management specialist. We've known that inheritance have cost the sale of a farm, and because of poor planning, they lost everything because they had to pay taxes on it.
Yeah.
So you can do both of RMD. We can take part of the IRA above and beyond that to go to Rose's fund or wherever. And don't put the burden on your kids if that's a problem. I'm concerned about that 86. I look at Paul over here. When you get to 86, what are you going to do about it? That happened about 4 years ago, I think, Paul. And I say the years go by quickly. What used to be 66 is now 86. And what 86, I just noticed that my life expectancy by a planner is 10 years. And I says, "Guy, you want me to live 100 years to pay more? Is that what it is?" We appreciate your comments. They're all good planning objectives, and they aren't the same for everybody, but you got a plan for everybody in your whole dossier.
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
any
thank you for
other?
that comment, and I agree. I mean, planning's for everybody. So
Janet popped on
I have
with
a question. when you mentioned the stretch IRA and that rule was changing and that wasn't going to be possible anymore, if somebody already has, if they've gotten a TOD account and have been taking the minimum distribution, so they're already stretching it, does that new rule apply to them, or is that for only people who now are getting a TOD transferred to them?
It's only now. The old accounts are grandfathered in.
Okay.
So if you
Thank
have
you.
an inherited IRA, you can continue to take distributions as you have been.
Okay, thanks.
But then you do have to think that whoever receives that, and if that inherited IRA goes to the second generation, then the rules do change. So
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Any other last comments or questions for Ethan? Dennis? Oh, you're still muted.
Right there.
Gotcha. You're live.
Okay. My question is that you talked about farmland or land in general. Is it the same for buildings or houses or second homes or whatever? Is that essentially wrapped in the same package?
Yes. Yeah, and that is something that, like, and again, I don't deal in real estate, but like the community foundation, they can take gifts of land, especially if they're appreciated, and turn it into, there's a lot you can do with it. So that can be donated, and you can receive either a tax deduction now or, but yes, that is something that it doesn't have to be. I did one where it was somebody who had appreciated land where there was an expansion of a highway, and so all of a sudden the land became worth a lot more, but they didn't really want to take the capital gains on it, and they wanted to leave something to a charity, so they sold that land, put it into a charitable, I think it was a charitable remainder trust.
Oh.
They got some tax deductions, and then they received income from that remainder trust as well. So it was but it was giving away a significant portion of their estate to charity, but they also benefited from some income while they were living.
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful. Well, how about I close us with a quick word of prayer? Gracious God, we give you thanks this day for the work of gifted and wise financial planners like Ethan, who are woven into our lives and around us. Help continue to bring your wisdom into this deliberative process that everybody engages, thinking about how we can best reflect your wishes and your vision for the world and the planning that we do around the gifts that we have been given in our lives. Continue to make this world more in tune with your vision through these efforts, and continue to bless us deeply as we think about caring for one another in this way. Keep us all safe in this day, and those we love free from harm, and keep us connected as best we can as this time continues. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yes, thank you.